section. The Act further defines a state-owned enterprise as, quotes, an entity that is controlled or influenced directly or indirectly by a government or agency. So how does this relate to contracting by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police of Sinclair Technologies of Aurora, Ontario, to provide the RCMP with radio frequency filters, winning a bid as the low-cost bidder by about $60,000 over a Quebec company? Because Sinclair Technology, formerly a Canadian-owned company, became a wholly owned subsidiary of Norsat International in 2011. Now, Norsat International was also a Canadian company, was founded and based in Richmond, BC, but Norsat was acquired by Hytera Communications Company in 2017. Hytera is headquartered in Shenzhen, China, and is partially owned by a People's Republic of China investment holding company and is a major supplier of China's public security ministry. The acquisition of Sinclair's parent company, Norsat, by a company based in China with partial state ownership was not subject to a full and formal national security review by the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology under his authority granted by the Investment Canada Act. The same year Norsat was acquired by Hytera, the Chinese People's National Congress passed the National Intelligence Law of 2017. That law compels all Chinese nationals at home and abroad to collaborate with agents of the Chinese state on request to further the Chinese state interests. Specifically, that law passed in 2017 in Article 7 states, all organizations and citizens shall support, assist, and cooperate with the national intelligence efforts in accordance with the law and shall protect national intelligence work secrets they are aware of. Further, in Article 10, in that Act, in that national intelligence law, it states, as necessary for their work, national intelligence work institutions are to use necessary means, tactics, and channels to carry out intelligence efforts domestically and abroad. That means all Chinese headquarter businesses are an extension of the Communist Party of China's intelligence and espionage network as required by their domestic law. In February of this year, the United States Justice Department filed 21 charges against Hytera for stealing mobile radio telecommunications technology from Motorola. In November, President Joe Biden signed legislation to prevent Hytera and other Chinese companies such as Huawei Technologies that have been deemed security threats from receiving new equipment licenses from U.S. regulators. U.S. Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau published a list of communications equipment and services that are deemed to pose unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States or the security and safety of United States persons. The U.S. FCC has listed video surveillance and telecommunications equipment produced by Hytera Communications Corporation used for the purpose of public safety, security of government facilities, physical security surveillance of critical infrastructure, and other national security purposes, including telecommunications or video surveillance services provided by such entity using such equipment from Hytera. It's banned in the United States. That's all public information. It took me about 5 minutes to figure this stuff out and find it. Yet the Liberal government did not use its authority under the Investment Canada Act to ban Hytera and its subsidiaries from bidding and receiving government contracts, nor have the Liberals conducted a full and formal national security review of Hytera's ownership of these Canadian assets. So to summarize, the RCMP awarded to a company owned by Chinese government state interests over a Quebec-based company and owned company with Canadian technology a contract to supply sensitive hardware for the communication systems of the RCMP, whose parent company has been blacklisted and charged for espionage and stealing secrets in the United States. The Liberal Minister of Industry never conducted a formal national security review of the takeover of the company, the parent company of Sinclair and Norsat by the Chinese-based company Hytera. Let's remember that the Investment Canada Act defines a state-owned enterprise, quotes, as an entity that is controlled or influenced directly or indirectly by a government agency. Clearly, Norsat and by extension, Sinclair meet that definition. And also remember that the Act gives the minister the power, and I would argue the responsibility, to seek a formal, full national security review of the takeover of a Canadian company by a state-owned enterprise, and in particular, companies based in the telecommunications industry in Canada. If the minister has, the Act again says, if the minister has reasonable grounds to believe that an investment by a non-Canadian could be injurious to national security, the minister may, within the prescribed period, send to the non-Canadian a notice that an order for review of the investment may be made under subsection 25. The minister did not do that. So why did this government not do a full security review and reject the takeover of a Canadian telecommunications company by a state-owned enterprise of the government of China? This committee and the public needs to know that. Why has the government of Canada not told every government department, every Crown corporation, board or agency of government that all acquisitions of Canadian companies by Chinese state-owned enterprises are subject to full national security reviews under the Investment Canada Act? Particularly since the government of China requires Chinese-based companies under their law to see corporations as an extension of the Chinese state. And that as such, quotes again from that law, national intelligence work institutions are to use the necessary means, tactics, and channels to carry out intelligence efforts domestically and abroad. Why are all bids by such entities for Canadian government needs not flagged for full security review under the Investment Canada Act before awarding? Why has the Minister of Industry been so lax in overseeing the Investment Canada Act and not doing a full national security review of Canadian assets and supplying Canadian governments with services from state-owned enterprises from non-democratic countries? Remember, state-owned enterprises from China are heavily subsidized by their government, enabling them to bid at below cost for government projects, which for-profit Canadian companies cannot do. That's how they are winning bids in Canada. Hytera loses money every year. So a firm that is owned by an undemocratic government that loses money most years by bidding below cost for work obviously must have other motivations and purposes. The committee needs to examine the failure of the government to do its duty under the Investment Canada Act and to protect Canadians and Canadian businesses from the injurious national security harm that these entities pose to Canada. Canada's security is a serious and urgent concern when it comes to established pattern of this government issuing sensitive contracts to Chinese state-owned enterprises, as it did in 2021 when the Liberal Global Affairs Minister awarded another Chinese state-owned enterprise a contract for providing sensitive security equipment to all of Canada's missions abroad. And this follows the Liberal government's issues around China's access to Canada's sensitive biological lab work in Winnipeg and its exclusive contract at the beginning of COVID pandemic to acquire only COVID vaccines from the Chinese government company called CanSino, which this company has done some study on. This committee needs to understand why the minister and this government did not exercise their responsibilities under the Investment Canada Act in consideration of state-owned enterprises of a sensitive Canadian telecommunications company. The committee needs to examine why the RCMP and our senior law enforcement agency in Canada was not advised by the Minister of Industry, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Minister of Procurement to not utilize these Communist Party of China-controlled companies for their needs. This is an urgent matter and why I have brought forward the motion, which we have just distributed, for immediate hearings on the RCMP contracting with a company that is compelled under China's national intelligence law to use every tool to spy on foreign nationals and acquire information, data, and technology they can for the People's Republic of China government. that the Minister of Industry has not utilized his power and responsibility under the Investment Canada Act to prevent Canada and Canadians from injurious harm bears examination. So with that, I will read. It's a very long motion, Mr. Chair, but if you will, I will read the motion. That this committee, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, undertake a study concerning the contract awarded to Sinclair Technologies, which is owned by Norsat International, a subsidiary of Chinese telecommunications firm Hytera, a partially state-owned enterprise by the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China, to build and maintain a radio frequency filtering system for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Whereas China's People's National Congress passed the National Intelligence Law in 2017 to compel all Chinese nationals at home and abroad to collaborate with agents of the Chinese state on request to further Chinese state interests by prolonging confidential data and engaging in compromise of infrastructure around the world. And whereas a Quebec firm with Canadian technology was not selected in the bidding process by the RCMP, and whereas the acquisition of Norsat by Hytera in 2017 did not undergo a full and complete national security review, and in Section 2 of the Canada Investment Act requiring the protection of Canada's national security was ignored by the government, and whereas the Canada Investment Act further defines state-owned enterprises as an entity that is controlled or influenced directly or indirectly by a government or agency, and whereas A, the committee hold the necessary number of meetings to examine in detail how the Canada Investment Act process failed national security, that this study is prioritized by the committee and the first meeting to take place Tuesday, December 13th and Wednesday, December 14th. B, the committee invite 1, the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. 2, the Honourable Marco Mendocino, Minister of Public Safety. 3, the Honourable Helena Jacek, Minister of Public Services and Procurement. 4, the Honourable Carla Coltro, former Minister of Public Services and Procurement and Accessibility. 5, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Commissioner Brenda Lucky. 6, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore. 7, Jody Thomas, National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. 8, senior officials of the Communications Security Establishment. 9, senior officials of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. And 10, Amy Chan, President of the Chief Executive Officer of Sinclair Technologies. C, the committee order the production of all relevant briefing notes, memorandums, and documents which are in the possession of the Department of Industry, Department of Public Works and Government Services, the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Communications Security Establishment, and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, provided that 1, these documents shall be deposited with the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel in both official languages within 4 weeks of the adoption of this order. 2, a copy of these documents shall also be deposited with the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel in both official languages within 4 weeks of the adoption of this order, with any proposed redaction of information which, in the government's opinion, could reasonably be expected to compromise national security. 3, the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel shall promptly thereafter notify the chair whether it is satisfied that the requested documents were produced as ordered, and if not, the chair shall be instructed to present forthwith, and on behalf of the committee, a report to the House outlining the material facts of the situation. 4, the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel shall provide documents as redacted pursuant to subparagraph 2 to the clerk of the committee, who shall distribute them to members of the committee and publish them on the committee's website forthwith. 5, the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel shall discuss with the committee at an in-camera meeting within 2 weeks of the redacted documents being distributed pursuant to subparagraph 4, whether they agree with the redactions proposed by the government pursuant to subparagraph 2. And 6, The committee may, after hearing from the Office of the Law Clerk on Parliamentary Counsel, pursuant to subparagraph 5, accept the proposed redactions or reject some or all of the proposed redactions and request the production of those unredacted documents in the manner to be determined by the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.